Very good morning, it's 10:24. This is Bev Turner today on GB News, on the TV and on DAB radio. Let me introduce my guest to you this morning. I'm delighted to be joined by author and historian Dr. Tessa Dunlop and a broadcaster and a futurist, Andrew Eborn, and lawyer. We can still call you a lawyer, can't we?
You can call me a lawyer, absolutely.
I can call you anything I want. I want an award.
I am so impressed, you know, aspirational figure personality of the year. I love it. It's got to be good.
I'm using it to my advantage this morning, believe me. I've got the boys to polish the award, go and get me a croissant. They said it's going to my
You got a croissant?
I got a croissant, but I haven't eaten since last night, so don't give me too much of a hard time about that. Right. What is happening to this country, Tessa Dunlop? Front page of the Daily Mail, the shocking rise of the something-for-nothing Britain. Over half of households get more from the state than they pay in tax, while the top 10% of earners account for 53% of all income tax. What's going on?
As it should be. This is just, forgive me, but talk about dog whistle. This is just designed to get people jumping up and down in their armchairs. Oh, it's shocking. It's not shocking. It's absolutely predictable. Let's just take the second part of the subheadline. Top 10% of earners account for 53% of all income tax.
Right.
But half the nation's wealth sits with the top 10% of the richest. Not necessarily earners, but your asset-rich group. Half of our nation's wealth in just top 10%. So we'd expect them to be taxed.
Yes,
equivocably. Then let's go for the something-for-nothing cost of Britain. Well, I will have you know, Bev, I work 9 to 5. I do my Dolly Parton every day. I've got 2 children of infant and school age. And this something-for-nothing is suggesting not those who are sitting on benefits. By the way, you can't stand on benefits. You can only ever sit on them, all right? Including our use of the NHS and, for example, state education. So, breaking news, I am a something-for-nothing citizen, because I definitely receive more at the moment because of my children being in state education than I pay in tax.
But the division between those who contribute more and take more has steadily gone up. That is the trajectory, OK? And I want... Andrew Eborn, I want a smaller state. I want them to just deregulate, let businesses run, let us run our lives, and stop acting with such a kind of patrician role in the lives of people. Something has gone wrong with people expecting something.
You're absolutely right, and this is what they've said and what they're claiming. Ian Duncan Smith has come out and said, look, lockdown changed the psyche of the British people.
It did.
And I think you've sort of to work at it, going back to the Norman Tebbit, get on your bike and go and get some sort of work. But there's a difference, and what Tessa says is right, because there are some people who go out and work all the hours under the sun. They don't earn as much as some of the top rate of tax people, but they're not scroungers. They're not the Daily Mail sponging off the state. This is more about the psyche of the British people. What is going to incentivise people to get out there and work? And you'll recall that Jeremy Hunt, he changed the boundaries, if you like, about taxpayers and so on and so forth. So it used to be the top threshold, 45%, was 150,000. That's now been brought down to 125,140. So basically, more people who are earning 150,000 were paying £1,243 more in tax. What you need to do is give people the incentive to get out and work.
Yes, there's not enough of that, is there, Tessa?
I think it's quite lazy of the Conservative government to blame the one thing that wasn't fully in their control, the coronavirus crisis. Actually, we've shrunk our economy. I know I'm not allowed to say the word on GB News, but no prizes for guessing why our economy shrunk by 5% more than any other country, incidentally, in the Western world.
You can blame Brexit for that.
Brexit has shrunk the economy. So aside from that, the pound in our pocket goes less far. It gets less in terms of the export market. And globally, energy prices have rocketed and expect them to stay high in the long term, even without a war in the Ukraine. That means that the pound goes less far. That means that more of us...
But it's the quantitative easing that's pushed the inflation. The fact that we were printing money...
That too, that's COVID.
But that was COVID policy.
That's COVID. So,
that's separate from the virus.
But my point is, it's not just COVID, but all of it means that previously, in the Blair years, for example, when our economy was booming, much stronger than most on the continent, stripping ahead, very strong pound, we actually felt pretty well off on 2 household salaries. So my husband and I, middle earners, yeah, man. But now it's like, whew, OK, we've made the end of the month.
That's because they were flogging all the gold and spending everything. And as they said when they left, there's nothing left in the bank.
And that was that good comedy note they put in the thing, as you say. Yeah. But it is extraordinary. It's up from 24 million under Tony Blair. 2/5 of households is what they were saying beforehand. It's now 36 million is what they're claiming, which is about more than half. But we need to look at what it actually means. So get beneath the the headlines and about that sort of stuff. Because how much does education cost? How much does health cost? How much do the roads? All the things you throw into the equation.
How much of the benefit, you know, and the fact that the benefit fraud now is believed to have rocketed to £8.5 billion a year,
including the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's just paid a £1 million fine.
But he wasn't benefit fraud. Like, there's a real difference. I think there is a problem. There is culturally a problem for some young people, particularly, who are in a benefits culture. And like you were saying, Andrew, about how do we incentivise those kids to aim higher and work?
Incidentally, though, one of the big jumps are those over 50 in the post-COVID world, claiming benefit. But can we blame them entirely when you've got NHS waiting lists of 18 months? If you can't get your hip replacement, you can't work.
But there is
actually, where do you... What bit of the state do you prioritise? Do you mend the NHS to mend people to get them back to work?
But it feels like in order to avoid being criticised for being cruel, the Tories are just dead set now on this role of handing out, I will look after you. Of course we need a welfare state to catch those people who are desperately, and they are increasing by the day.
Yes.
But psychologically, something has happened between how we feel about the state. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
You're absolutely right, Bev, and I think this is the problem with the headlines. If you label everybody as a scrounger, that was like 53% basically, they're all scroungers.
Including me.
Exactly, especially. I think you were top of the list.
Very much. And by the way, the phone, thanks all. In lieu of a fee.
But the problem is you're not dealing with the mischief. And the mischief is those who are abusing the system. That's the real thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Look at those people who are...
Oh, not even abusing it. It's those who just see it as a way of life.
It's the psyche. This is what I say, the psyche. Has that changed?
This is society-wide, and it's why you can't exempt Nazim at the top from the kid at the bottom, is... All of us now feel, why should I do something for nothing?
Oh, I hate the phrase, why should I?
But I think that permeates society, and that people think, oh, what does it matter if politicians behave badly? It does, because it sets the national tone.
It really does.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that in our next section, guys, but quick break now. It's bonkers. We're talking about it now. Tessa Dunlop's here and Andrew Eborn. National Grid paying homeowners to switch off radiators. What do you think? Is this just a big scam? How can they possibly know? Well, it doesn't add up.
It's a two-tier system, not just the NHS, which we're going to be discussing in a minute, but also how you source your energy, because you can only benefit from this scheme if you have a smart meter. So I'm happy for my children to freeze and to smell and to eat cold food if it saves me a couple of quid. But actually, I don't have a smart meter, so we'll just go out tonight and be profligate with the heating.
But will it incentivise you to get one?
I mean,
That's
this is
point,
the first time
it?
it's kicked in. It's our second cold snap. We're veering towards almost the end of winter, surely, and it's only a couple of quid that you're going to be saving. So I think for the effort, probably not. But my point is, it does feel a bit like, you know, some for them and none for you. So
you see, I got a smart meter ages ago.
Yes.
I thought, oh, that's good. I can see what I'm using. And on some days, it is quite good. You're watching. Now I've realised it's being used against me, and the potential to have it used against me is only increasing by the day. Andrew, what do you think?
I think that you're absolutely right, and you always got to ask, why are they doing this? And I think it's actually to increase the people with smart meters turnaround. Here's an incentive for you. You switch off between the peak usage hours, 5 o'clock to 6, as you say, most people are probably still at work, so it's going to affect the other people anyway. Why are they doing this? And I think you look beneath the mischief, and the mischief basically is get more people to use smart meters. Here's an incentive. It's a bribe.
And then we can know what you're using.
Exactly.
We can know when you're using it. It's creeping towards more of a surveillance state, and it will. Let's face it, the companies running these fuel companies will profit. They will somehow use this to their advantage. It will not be for our benefit.
Without a doubt, I think we always look at the bottom, don't we? Think, oh, you know, benefits and the problem with the poor people. But actually, it's the big guys at the top who are always reaping the biggest rewards. But there is something quite scary about all of this. The National Grid have made it really clear, and we should stress this, the lights ain't going to go off tonight.
Yeah.
But 2 coal plants are being put on standby. This is not a step forward. We're in kind of dancing on thin ice, forgive the metaphor, and we're dependent on imports from Europe, and apparently France is short and we're short, and when we're feeling good, we give to France, and when France is, you know, they give to us, and as neither of us like each other at the moment, and there's a shortage of energy.
But it fits within the narrative, heating or eating, you turn around on that sort of basis. I say, that's the mischief. More people, and it'd be interesting to look at the statistics, which we're doing a few things, saying how many more people are going to buy one or get one installed as a result.
It's the creep towards the powerlessness of us as individuals, isn't it? Just give us the power that we need. Give it us at a competitive rate and stop complicating it by looking into my house and knowing what I'm doing.
But maybe it is complicated. Look at it, the same with commuting and travelling. You pay less if you travel off-peak. Is it such a terrible idea that actually, if you can manage to manoeuvre your lifestyle so that you can do your washing at midday, it might save you a penny? I don't find that as offensive as you two, Adam.
Well, I don't know. It sort of metastasises this psychology, this relationship that we've got with these organisations, doesn't it? And there will be houses tonight who are fighting between 5 and 6 o'clock.
No, absolutely.
There'll be family rows tonight at 5, 6, when the mum is saying to the kids, turn off your PlayStation. The kids don't want to turn on PlayStation. And then she'll go to her husband, don't put the kettle on. It's between 5 and 6.
Yeah.
This is how this kind of manifests itself in family homes. It causes conflict and division.
Breaking news, Bev. Every night I'm going, turn off the PlayStation. At least I've got an excuse, except I don't have a meter.
Yeah, but imagine, because, you know, there's going to be teenagers in the house who are going to go, I don't know what you're talking about, Mum. And there's going to be, you know, grumpy granddads going, I've paid for this all my life. I want to keep the heat.
We should get the stats.
That's how it happens. It causes division in families. Right, talking about division, Gordon Brown has written today warning the Tories about testing the water for a two-tier healthcare system.
The fundamental point of the NHS, founded on the 5th of July 1948, is it should be free at source. Savid, he wrote a fantastic piece in the Times. He did, most of which I agreed with, because we are under a tremendous pressure. 10 million people didn't get the treatment they needed during lockdown and so on and so forth. The diseases have changed, the requirements have changed since the NHS was set up. It's all about cancer as opposed to polio and so on and so forth. The solution, however, is not to charge people to go and see their GP. He talks about the Swedish model and the Danish model, where you pay about 20 quid equivalent. In Ireland, you pay €75 if you go directly for a referral. It is a lot, but the idea, he says, is to disincentivise people from getting treatment. And that the problem is you're going to miss out those who need it.
So well, didn't it? In lockdowns, people didn't go and get their cancers looked at. And
so
look where we are now with our excess deaths.
I'll tell you what the solution is, and you're going to love this as well.
You're going to say robots.
I am. I'm going to tell you. Because I'm going to say robots and AI. Look at what's happened in Milton Keynes, where fantastic. Milton Keynes is the shining example of people who've engaged with things. Robots and surgery, which is decreased time that you need to recover.
Right.
The efficiency is much, much better. And they're doing they just announced about they're doing gynae procedures and so on and so forth. Really, really complex.
Are you telling me I should have a gynae procedure
with a
robotic?
Yes, I am. And Milton Keynes will do that. And they've also got little bots going round delivering medicine.
I am not going to Milton Keynes to have anywhere near my gynae
exploratory hand.
I can't think of anything worse, can you? I can't think of... Are you honestly advocating?
But it's not about mechanical. It's all about... And doctors will tell you, it is the best thing ever. Embrace robotics, embrace AI.
And I'm embracing robotics in stirrups.
Can you just give Andrew a reality pick?
Yes.
The only thing I've got, the big criticism I've got with this headline, Gordon Brown, remember him, warns of Tories testing the water for a two-tier healthcare. We already have a two-tier healthcare system. So many of my friends and people I, love dearly and who really abhor the idea of paying for treatment have found themselves paying for treatment because otherwise they go around with a catheter or an ongoing infection for months.
So the way you reduce, and you can reduce the waiting time, if you could automate the escalation procedure. I've spoken to many, many medics about this.
Look at me, I'm opening my mind to you, Andrew Eborn, with your futurist intentions.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm listening to you. Tell me how robots are going to save the NHS.
So a number of things. They will basically make procedures a lot more efficient, and they do say it's reducing the recovery. Now, Milton Keynes, we should get some people from Milton Keynes to talk about the practical steps that have been taken. Have a look at that.
Maybe you could do some exploratory surgery live on air.
They can do it. Robots are the future. Also, artificial intelligence is the great way of basically streamlining processes. If it can reduce the escalation times and work out the sensible way of dealing with it, that is the practical thing. The NHS is bust, but charging people is not the way to fix it. Embracing robotics and AI is.
What?
Have we got no time to talk about...
Over? No, I'm still trying to work out what you mean when you say AI can streamline these systems.
I'll give you an example. So artificial intelligence, for example, for mortgage applications, which sometimes will take about 30 days, they've now streamlined that. They can do that in 3 minutes. If you turn around and say, look, when a patient... I'm working with a number of doctors, a number of hospitals and so on and so forth, streamlining the process. For example, patient videos. What happens is your first time you go for a GP, they ask you all sorts of questions, you're not sure about the procedure and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Simple step, we're doing videos explaining the procedure so that patients feel more comfortable and deal with those sort of questions.
How do you ask your questions of a robot?
Yeah. And I've got to just keep it real. 50% of our need from the NHS comes when we're over 65. And actually, they're not the most embracing of tech. Many are, but many aren't. And I think it can be very off-putting. And actually, there's nothing like talking human to human. I love Bev so much more now I've met her in the flesh. Have we got time to talk about Boris Johnson?
I'm inspiring, you know, just remember that.
I'm very
I'm an
inspired.
inspirational woman.
She gets younger.
She does.
I want to talk about Boris Johnson.
We are, but I think we're going to talk about it in the next section because we've been banging on too much. I'm still trying to work it out. No, I don't want it. If I'm going to have a medical procedure, I do not want it to explain to me by a video on YouTube. I want a doctor to sit down and explain it. Yeah. And then if I have any questions, give me the dignity to ask those questions.
And you can get both. You can get both, and that's the idea. I'll take you through the process next time, and you will love it. I will change... I will change your...
And on that bombshell, right, that's the end of our first hour. We're going to be crossing over to Grenfell, actually, after the break, to talk about fire safety regulations that are coming into force today. We'll be right back with more after a short break. Very good morning. It's 11:20. This is Bev Turner today on GB News TV and DAB Radio. My panel are still here. I'm delighted to be joined by author and historian Dr. Tessa Dunlop and broadcaster and futurist Andrew Eborn. Right, Tessa, are we talking about Prince Andrew or Boris Johnson? Which would you like to talk about first?
Oh, the two heavyweights of my life. I think we're going to go Prince Andrew, then Boris Johnson. The question of Prince Andrew, many of us may have felt, oh, that's been dealt with. You know, and I'm not suggesting for one moment that he's got away with it, but at least it fell off from the headlines. Someone like me, I'm a monarchist. I like the idea of constitutional monarchy. I totally understood what had to be dealt with because it was a drip, drip, drip into our public narrative, wasn't it?
Just to remember,
outstanding case.
For those who don't know what we're dealing with, Virginia Giuffre, who made accusations against him of inappropriate sexual activity when she was under... I want to say under 16, but it was in America. I think she was
17.
Thank you. She was under 18.
17.
She was 17.
He settled out of court. We don't know for how many millions, but one of the premises of the settlement was he did not assume any guilt.
Yeah.
And this is what he has clearly been chafing over ever since. And he felt he was jumped into the accord because, of course, it was his mother's jubilee, and then the funeral meant there's been no space for this conversation. Of course, it's been triggered because tonight, Ghislaine Maxwell, a convicted felon currently in prison in America for facilitating possibly the most notorious paedophile of all times, or one of them at least, is speaking out live on television, claiming she has no memory of that photo. Now, surely everyone knows that photo, the one of him...
Prince Andrew held with his arm
Prince Andrew, what he's saying, yes.
Sorry, just because... So, but isn't the new twist on this is that Prince Andrew has just inherited a load of money...
Exactly.
...with the Queen's passing, and now he feels emboldened, Andrew, to take this back to court to clear his name. How extraordinary.
Well, it's an extraordinary... There are two things on this. He is saying that he was basically forced into shutting it up so it didn't spoil the Jubilee celebrations, which is a narrative that some may believe.
He paid 13 million...
12 million, and he had to sell his little Swiss chalet, which he had with Fergie, all that sort of stuff.
The hardship stuff.
The hardship stuff. And they had the wonderful Andrew, the musical, on Channel 4 over December, which is very good, with the best advertising campaign ever, because they went to the Woking Pizza Express and said, if you miss it, you better have a decent alibi, which I love, they put little billboards. What he's basically saying, he's saying the photo is fake. Now, we all know in this wonderful world of AI and artificial intelligence and that you can fake photos. Ghislaine Maxwell is saying that recollections may vary. I never saw this woman.
To be clear, she's saying she has no memory.
Yes.
And this is therefore reinforcing Andrew's point.
Yes.
So it's about emboldening his case. But she's in prison. So this has been triggered. Yes, you're right, because suddenly his pockets are somewhat deeper. And generally, when you slug it out in the courts, those with the deepest pockets tend to win. But also, she is now being given this international voice, which I feel angry about.
This is what I don't understand, right? Yes. I don't understand this. If he felt that he had no case to answer, why pay the money in the first place? and therefore, if he, do you know what I mean? If his conscience was clear, he wouldn't have paid that money in the first place. So what could possibly change?
I agree 100%. And his lawyers, according to this report, are saying, look, don't do it, leave it alone. He is turning around and saying that he was basically forced into getting a settlement. And the narrative would be he was forced into getting a settlement so you don't spoil the Jubilee celebrations.
But surely you're forced into getting a settlement if you've done something that you might want to kind of not have to...
Remember, he never...
He never admitted anything. It's without prejudice to that sort of
what this points to, once again, is his entitlement. He still is a man in shock that something mud has been thrown in some of it. It's like he can't kind of believe he's lost his HRA. Well, that's what happens if you're born with a
talking of spoiled man-child babies, Boris Johnson... Sorry, I know a lot of you like him.
Boris Bank Chum. We always love sort of headlines and things like that, don't they?
Look at this, BBC, Boris Bank Chum. This is absolutely genius, the headline there, isn't it? Right, what's he done, Tessa, and do we think he's guilty of anything inappropriate here?
One of his big Tory donors, Richard Sharp, who unfortunately, quite quickly after this, basically facilitation of an £800,000 loan, became the chairman of the BBC. And now it's unravelling because this was a kind of question of favours and therefore appointments. Just so many things stand out in this case. First of all, £800,000. He was living in a government-funded flat. What did he need £800,000 for? I did ask this on Twitter. I thought the best response was to pay for his gazillion children because he's not entitled to child benefit. But of course, the bigger point is, you know, there's a seemingly neutral organisation. Impartiality is the buzzword of the BBC. The chairperson of that organisation not only is a Tory donor, by the way, that's standard fare. Under Tony Blair, the chairman was a Labour donor. But that actually, there was an introduction with a guy called Blythe, a Canadian. Boris Johnson's related to him, and somehow they helped him.
Yeah, he's a distant cousin. He's a distant cousin of Boris Johnson, and basically he gave the loan guarantee. But it does raise questions about impartiality and so on and so forth, which he would need to answer. I mean, and I think you're looking at that sort of principle. I mean, chairman of the BBC, Marmaduke Hussey, Lady Hussey's, all in the news. She was one of, he was a previous chairman, and very good one indeed. And I met Richard. He's a lovely guy, and I think we have to make sure that we get away from just the sensational headlines. Was his appointment as a result of this, or is it just really a question to be answered?
And therefore, I guess the point is, who is in the wrong?
Yes.
Because, you know, the headline is that it's Boris Johnson who's acted out with perhaps some sort of... He's tapped him up for this guarantee of the loan. Yeah. Maybe Boris Johnson is in the wrong for doing that. I can't help but think, if it's a friend of a friend of a friend, maybe it's a small world, they've helped each other out. I'm not sure it's that bad.
The helping of the loan isn't the problem. It's that very shortly afterwards, he's then appointed, it's a government appointment to this key impartial role as chairperson of the BBC. But just quickly on the whole Johnson narrative, you see him out there in Ukraine, and of course the timing of that photograph,
of course,
Zelensky is not coincidental, but it's such a missed opportunity at the moment with Germany foot-dragging, mealy-mouthed over their Leopard tanks, not even letting Poland give their tanks to Ukraine. We should be leading on this. We were so strong on it, and actually, because of all the sort of quagmire of sleaze around our government, it's a tragedy.
I can't think the worst thing that Boris Johnson has done, it was all the papers this week, is him writing his name on the bomb that was being sent. Did you see that?
That was
a really awful image of him in Kyiv, signing his name on a bomb designed for Russia. It's like, who advised you to do that? Do you not see how inflammatory and provocative a statement that is?
Well, it's like Prince Harry talking about the Taliban thing. You don't want to be associated with the death and destruction on that sort of basis.
But all of this moves away from actually Britain's clear-sighted and generous backing. They were late to the picnic.
Very generous backing.
We have been hosting Russian oligarchs for far too long, but we made a clear cut from that, and it's a shame that we don't have good leaders to follow through at the moment.
Arguably too generous backing. Anyway, listen, COVID restrictions are still in operation in 2/3 of hospitals. What? Restricting patients from seeing their loved ones. Over 2/3 of NHS trusts are still using outdated COVID restrictions.
Well, the key word in that is outdated, because if it's no longer effective, then you shouldn't be having it. And all sorts of questions regarding the effectiveness. And you've been very publicly about your views
Questioning
and things
the
like
logic.
that. Yeah, but you have to question the logic. So why is this happening? And if it's not necessary, then it shouldn't be in place. What needs to happen, like most of these things, the key is about communication. Explain why it's effective, why it's necessary, and then ask those questions. We have to question everything.
What do you think, Tessa? I mean, it's even things like some hospitals are still... the Care Quality Commission revealed over half of pregnant women were denied the support of their partner while giving birth last year.
Yeah, I think...
I have no words.
It's particularly, it feels quite punitive, doesn't it, entering any kind of public healthcare space at the moment. I've noticed that Steve Barclay's, I mean, he's kind of scared of his own department, because half of them are striking. They're striking today, the ambulance workers. And I think this is OK, you can make your own decision about COVID rules then. It's almost like, here's a little crumb, because I'm not going to give you the pay you want, but you can... And I think the problem is that healthcare workers are so pushed from nurses and auxiliaries upwards that probably is a bit inconvenient having, you know, new dad wandering around and getting lost. Well, so it's easier, actually, to minimise the interaction with Joe Public. And, of course, it's scientifically obvious, isn't it, that actually the more people you have milling around, the more germs you have milling around.
Yeah, but then you have us. That's how we lived our life before COVID. There's no reason why we should change that.
Indeed, but the difference is now... and partly because of COVID, we've got an NHS at tipping point.
Right.
And
because of COVID regulations, we've got an NHS.
And they were told last March to open up.
The operations were postponed, and there's this massive backlog, and so they don't want to take any risk ever. But you have that human thing. You know, if you're Auntie Mabel in hospital and I come and see you and you can't hear me because I'm wearing a mask, it's much harder.
Yeah.
But why are we... Do you know what never happened, Andrew? We never had the actual bell to say COVID's over.
Well, in March they gave the call saying... I know you're right, and we won't.
It is in terms of how we live our lives. It has to be. It's not now when.
We now have to live with it, is the narrative, isn't it?
2 weeks to flatten the curve.
Yeah,
at what point, at what metric was Boris Johnson going to say, right, it's done now, we're over? We still never had that metric.
But back in March, they said you could lift these restrictions, and this is the point. So 70% of hospitals are not lifting it, in spite of being told in March that it was. Which is why I say you have to ask, why are they in place? Because if it's causing more damage as a result of people not being able to see loved ones and so on and so forth, it's got to be wrong. If you need it to prevent it, then it could be interesting.
The most acute crisis, the most acute cases of those with coronavirus are in hospitals.
Yes.
Correct.
So they have a very different narrative and see it very different from us.
No, I do understand that, but we always had infections that were going to be risky to people in hospitals. Coronavirus that came along was worse. I accept that, spring 2020. But what we're dealing with now is no different to what we had before spring 2020.
But I think the key difference is, A, we have another endemic problem with COVID as well as flu, and you have an NHS that ain't managing its numbers. So any kind of risk they fear is going to tip them over. And that's the landscape difference. I think... I'm not excusing it.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting, but I think that logic is flawed, because I think the risk... You know, if you have a pregnant woman going in to give birth, and she's told you can't have your partner with you in your... at your birth because of COVID.
Yeah.
I agree, that's humane. It's inhumane.
It's inhumane.
It is inhumane. And you're absolutely right. And if the restrictions cause more damage than good, that's got to be wrong. So it's good to call it out. We need the hard facts and evidence. People should look at that, which is why I say question everything. Why are they still in place? It's not reassuring people. It's causing more damage than good.
But at the moment, with the strikes unravelling, the government isn't in full control, which is why they've left this. Yeah, and so they've left this as a decision for healthcare workers.
Yes.
So we're going to get science capping humanity, if you like.
And do you know what, as well, it brings back to what I was saying earlier about the arguments that they'll have at dinner tables between 5 and 6 tonight. This will be arguments in wards, in maternity wards, and in all sorts of hospitals, because you will have some midwives saying you can't come in because of COVID. You'll have other midwives saying this isn't fair, it's inhumane, it's not compassionate. And there's your conflict and there's your division. And we just have to have somebody at the top. Where are the grown-ups in the room making these decisions so that people aren't fighting amongst themselves?
That.
Right, I'm whittering away with my panel here. Thank you, Liam Halligan, for that. Andrew Eborn is back with me, and also Dr. Tessa Dunlop. Now, we are looking at... We're all very aware of the effects that the last few years have had on the education of our youngsters. But there's a news story that's just broken this morning, actually, while we've been on air, about the fall in first-class degrees after a crackdown on pandemic-grade inflation. What does that mean? What's happened,
interestingly,
Tessa?
this marks the first time there's been a fall in the award of degrees since the organisation that monitored it was founded in 1993. So it's not just during COVID times that we've seen grade inflation. There's a lot of factors that come into play. I know a bit about this because to do my PhD, to get your funding, you'd also do a bit of lecturing.
Yeah.
And it's such a different relationship now between student and lecturer, because previously in our day, Bev, we are so old that we have to do hands up. We got our education for free. I even got government grant to help me drink. I got free money from the government. Obviously, it was meant to be for accommodation and clothes.
You're one of these sponges on the front of today's Daily Mail. Taking more from the state.
But nowadays, of course, kids are paying. They might not be paying up front. They're building massive debt. 9 grand just for tuition fees alone. So they want bang for their buck. There's an expectation that they're not just going to be receiving a really high quality education, but that they're also going to get something worth having at the end of it.
Absolutely.
But does it explain why the grades have
well,
gone
not
down?
really. And lies, damn lies and statistics. My view is really clear. There used to be percentages. You used to say X percent would get first class.
Yes.
That sort of percentage would get upper seconds and so on and so forth. My view is that if everybody is of a certain standard, then everybody should be able to be afforded a first-class degree.
Yes.
And I think that would be the logical thing. Also, if you look deeper into the article, they say that the percentage is still higher than it was before the pandemic. What they're saying is that in 2021 to 2022, 32% of undergraduate degrees were awarded a first-class honour, a fall of 4% from 36% the year before. So you've got to ask, well, why is that happening? Is it because the standard is getting lower, or have the boundaries moved? And the trouble with these sort of things, they're the headline things, as opposed to getting into the details as to why that is happening.
Do we know why?
There is a boundary shift. Also, there's been a greater emphasis, for example, on coursework, which you can control more, and you're more likely to get your predicted grade. In our day, I remember I went to Oxford. My entire 3-year degree was judged on how I performed in 8 3-hour exams in 1 week. If I'd had flu, my period, can you imagine? Anything could have thrown me off. Actually, ironically, I feel great pity for those caught in the COVID pandemic, because it was such a great training. I mean, live TV, no problem, once you've done 8-hour exams, 8 3-hour exams.
It's a joy, especially this show. We love it. It's going to be brilliant. It's fantastic. Award-winning people.
With a robot one day.
It's already happened.
And I know it makes me unpopular with your viewers, but just one of the other key things to pull from this report.
Yes.
The number of EU entrants coming to our universities fell by 53%. Every student not educated in Britain, that is such a loss of soft power in Europe going into the future. I'm sorry.
But then some people would say, but that's fine, because what we want is British-born students to take those places.
No, those places are being taken by global citizens, predominantly people coming in from India.
And everything's 53% today, isn't it? 53% of all income tax and so on and so forth. We touched on earlier in the show. But again, you have to ask why. And it's no good just having the headlines unless you explain what's actually happening. Because if you explain what's happening, we then try and find the solution.
Yeah. Right, this is a story I really wanted us to do. It's a lovely little story in The Guardian today. This is a gentleman called Mark Frith. He was a BAFTA-winning documentary maker. And he got to 60. His family bought his mother's house off him. So he moved back to his family home that he'd grown up in and started to draw, and has made it his life's work and his life's passion. He's now making a living out of it. And it just made me think, what should we be revisiting from our childhood?
Wonderful stuff. I'll tell you exactly what. I'll tell you lots of things. And music is one of the most powerful things. Best video, if you haven't seen it, there's a ballerina called Marta Gonzalez, who was a principal ballerina, used to do Swan Lake, and she was lost in a different world through Alzheimer's. What happened? They put some headphones on, and it makes you sort of quite tearful. I know, but if you haven't, do look at it. They played the main thing from Swan Lake, Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, and she just came alive. She started doing the gestures and things like that. It brought tears to my... She can remember the movements and everything. Your childhood memories are all in there. The way that we can help people through this sort of stuff is brilliant. So go back to the early things that you used to do as a child. It is superb.
You know what I want to do sometimes? Just stand against a brick wall and throw a tennis ball back and forth.
Yeah.
Well, that's absolutely.
It's interesting because my day job is predominantly writing about very old people, their experiences, for instance, the last women who served in World War II, etc. And there is something joy-filled about watching these women go back in time. But also because human nature, we love to talk about ourselves.
Yeah.
And so few people actually ask these treasure troves of information about themselves. But I think on a more prosaic level, I grew up in the Highlands of Scotland and I desperately miss it, but I don't live up there anymore. But I do find if I can work out a way of just transporting a little bit, a lot of my childhood was about foraging. Go and pick the raspberries, go and pick the blackberries, go and forage for mushrooms, all those sorts of things. We were really remote. And so I go out in London, in the park with a cane, and when the brambles are out, I get pounds worth of brambles. And Dan said it's not worth it, the time it takes. No, but the joy it gives.
It is absolutely joy. And I also believe, and it's a strange thing about talking against technology, but the more means of communication that we have, the less we're able to communicate.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is people are now burying themselves in screens.
Yeah.
They don't know how to converse. So I would absolutely have a technology for a moment. We'll come back to technology another time. But if you can have that sort of period where you can get rid of all of that sort of stuff and just engage in a conversation, sit down, play a board game from your childhood or whatever, that is the best.
I love a parlour game.
Something we neglect at our peril, isn't it? Like, we've got back into playing cards over Christmas and all of those things. And I remember I was talking to my brother about this weekend, like, we would just go out in the morning in our roller boots for the day.
There you go.
And sometimes I think maybe I should just wake up on a Sunday morning and go out on my roller boots for the day.
Yeah.
And these are the kind of things we need for our mental... We talk about mental health so much. Don't go on antidepressants.
Really simple. It doesn't cost anything on that sort of basis.
Can I say, walking in the rain? I'm sorry, but roses in your cheeks.
I've been asking you all morning about this Twitter. I had a Twitter poll running about this move to provide discounts for your energy. If you cut your energy between 5 and 6 o'clock today, will you turn the heating off? Well, 82.3% of you say no, that you wouldn't be doing this. Interesting, isn't it? I've even had messages from people saying, because you are such a contrarian maverick crowd, I've had people saying, at 5 o'clock tonight, I'm going to turn my heating right up just to make a point.
Hey, I love it.
Andrew Eborn, Dr. Tessa Dunlop, thank you so much. I will see you again soon. Just after me is going to be Mark Longhurst, but I am Bev Turner. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10. Thanks for watching.